Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here this morning. Today, it's a great honor and privilege for me to introduce our guest speaker. I'm going to rearrange the program a little bit to give him maximum time on the floor. We'll take our reports at the end of the meeting. So let me introduce our Congressman, Mr. Ken Calvert. He's a lifelong resident of Riverside County and a 17-year small business owner in the restaurant and real estate industries, representing the 42nd Congressional District of Southern California. Mr. Calvert was born on June 8, 1953, attended neighborhood public schools, graduating from Corona High School in 1971. He attended 2 years at Chaffee College in Alta Loma and then enrolled in San Diego State University, where he graduated in 1975 with a Bachelor of Arts degree in economics. Ken is a Protestant and is involved in several local community volunteer organizations. The 42nd District encompasses the western edge of Riverside County, including the cities of Eastvale, Norco, Corona, Lake Elsinore, Wildomar, Canyon Lake, Menifee, Murrieta, and a portion of Temecula. Mr. Calvert was first elected to the House of Representatives in 1992 and was part of the historic Contract with America class of 1994 that swept the House to Republican control for the first time in 40 years. In the 113th Congress, Mr. Calvert continues to serve on the House Appropriations Committee, where he is chairman of the Interior and the Environment Subcommittee. Mr. Calvert is also a member of the Defense Subcommittees and Energy and Water Subcommittee. He serves on the House Budget Committee. Mr. Calvert was also elected to serve as chairman of the California Republican Delegation. Mr. Calvert has been the California Republican Delegation's voice on the House Steering Committee, which determines the House Republican Committee assignments since 2003. In the 113th Congress, Mr. Calvert's legislative priorities include enacting pro-growth policies that will help our struggling economy, reducing our national debt, reforming our tax code, supporting our military around the world, and supporting the mission in Afghanistan, strengthening borders and making the use of E-Verify mandatory for all employers in the United States, creating long-term solutions for California's energy and water problems, working towards the implementation of funding of new transportation corridors vital to Riverside County's future, reducing the time it takes to build infrastructures by making common sense, bipartisan reforms to our environmental laws, and much more. He is a great friend of the district and our local economy and has done much for the Orange County Water District, and for that we thank you, Mr. Calvert. Welcome to WACO, and you have the floor, sir.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. Thanks for getting up early this morning and coming out to hear from me. The good news is that Congress is not in session right now. The bad news is we're back in session next week. Probably be a very abbreviated session. You know, you may have noticed we're in a political year, and it's somewhat polarized back in Washington, D.C. So. But there's certain things that we need to get done. We have to do a continuing resolution to continue to fund the federal government and pay our bills for a period of time, probably until December. We have this XM Bank issue that we need to resolve because that expires at the end of September, so we need to get that on the floor, and a number of housekeeping things that need to be done. We'll probably come back right after the November elections for a lame duck session. Always beware of lame duck sessions because that's where the mischief happens. But it's necessary that we do that, and we'll see what happens there. But I'm here to obviously talk about water. And as you know, I've had the pleasure of representing Orange County for 10 years of the time I've been in Congress. And I know that probably no other area in the state of California has done more on water conservation and recycling than Orange County. You're to be commended. The current district I represent, which is mentioned, is basically your next door neighbor along the edge of Orange County in the Inland Empire. And we certainly know we have some challenges. And that's why it's absolutely critical that organizations such as yours continue to foster approaches that bring all these different interests together to make sure that we take care of these problems. As some of you may have heard, I now serve as the chairman of the Interior Appropriations Committee. And for those of you who are not familiar with the subcommittee, we're basically responsible for setting funding priorities for the Environmental Protection Agency and virtually all the Department of Interior agencies, including the Park Service, BLM, Forestry, Bureau of Indian Affairs, the Smithsonian institutions, the arts, the humanities, anything basically within the interior United States, we have the responsibility to pay the bills. Obviously, on the appropriations side, I'm happy to report that we're in a relatively good place. Prior to this year, the appropriations process kind of broke down. We were continuing to fund the government under a series of continuing resolutions rather than passing appropriation bills. We did pass an omnibus bill last year. The reason we're being able to pass the appropriation bills we've been able to do so far is because we had a budget agreement between the Senate and the House. Patty Murray and Paul Ryan were able to come to a top number, and we were able to set aside sequestration at least for this year, for this appropriation year. Next year, we're going to have to go back to the negotiating table and try to work out a new accommodation. I'm not going to get into all the stuff everybody wrote down for me. I just wanted to kind of go through this and really open it up for questions. One of the things I think we get in the appropriations process, we've passed 7 appropriation bills on the floor out of the 12 standing appropriation bills that fund the United States government. My bill is a little more difficult because of some of the issues that we have in the bill, especially the Environmental Protection Agency. Obviously, that's somewhat controversial this year because we've made a determination, or when I say we, the Environmental Protection Agency's made a determination that on issues such as the waters of the United States and issues of carbon regulation to go beyond, I believe, their authority that they've been given under the law. And so we cut their budget a little bit, about 27%. We cut them back to almost about the 1980 funding levels, 1987, something like that. So some of us want to fund it back to the time they came back into origin and put them out of business. But that probably couldn't get that out of the Senate. You can't get anything out of the Senate, so that's not anything new. The ongoing drought here in California, I don't have to tell any of you about that. It's gone from bad to worse. I can't divine whether or not we're going to have any rain this year. I pray to God that we do, because as you all know, Northern California especially is suffering mightily. It's costing our state billions of dollars. We've got hundreds of thousands of people in the agriculture business out of work. In fact, Fresno County is almost 11% unemployment. Kern County the same. Medora County, Merced County, San Joaquin County, Tulare County, all those counties up in the Central Valley are just suffering mightily. I was just up there the other day. You see the signs up, what are people going to do about water? And it makes you realize how important agriculture is to the state, and how many thousands and thousands of people, not just the people on the farms, but the people who go to the supermarkets to buy their produce and fruits and vegetables and the rest, find that why water is important, because you're going to see price increases, dramatic price increases, over and above what we've seen already. And that's why conservation is important. That's why what you've done here in Orange County is such an example of what you should do. You did it in the good times when water was around, and the cities that and counties that have done that have kind of softened the blow of this drought. Unfortunately, not enough people are doing that, and we need to encourage them to do so. And so, either through the Department of Reclamation or through the Corps or other agencies, to give federal leverage on some of these water projects that need to be developed to make sure we have water in the future. As you probably know, most of the reservoirs here in Southern California are in my congressional district. Diamond Valley Lake, Lake Matthews, the terminus, Lake Skinner, Lake Paris. All those reservoirs are extremely important, and happily they were built back in the day and they were built relatively quickly. I remember when Diamond Valley Lake was built. That was done quite a bit. Of course, gave us 800,000 acre-feet of storage. It's a very, very important project. But infrastructure needs to be built, and it's one of the things I want to talk about is this upcoming bond issue, of course, and the importance of maximizing the storage here in California. We've been looking at Lake Shasta for a long time. We know that can be expanded enormously, but we're not going to be able to do that for various political reasons. But at least we ought to raise Lake Shasta by 17 feet. Doesn't seem like a lot, but it does give us a significant amount of yield out of that, and it doesn't cost that much relatively versus various other types of storage projects. Sites Reservoir needs to be built. We've been talking about that for years. Those studies are just about complete, as with Shasta. We need a new reservoir on the San Joaquin River. Some people refer to it as Temperance Flat. And we need to expand and improve a number of reservoirs that we already have, such as the San Luis Reservoir and other reservoirs that need to be developed and made to be useful to the state of California. As you know, this bond issue has about $2.7 billion set aside for water storage, which is helpful. It's not enough, but it's helpful. And some other dollars for reclamation, recycling, and the rest. But it's going to take a significant investment to build those reservoirs. But as you all know, when you don't have water coming out of the tap, that's a significant cost too. And as an ongoing cost, people making determinations whether they should put their businesses in California, develop in California, the rest. If you can't show that there's an adequate water supply, then you got trouble. So it's time that we move ahead on this. And so I'm going to support that bond issue in November. I hope that all of you here go out in the community and talk about the importance of why this storage needs to be built. I know that people are going to hear, well, you know, California already has a significant amount of bond debt. Why are we doing this? This bond, by the way, is much improved over the last bond, which I didn't support, and which, remember, was 3 times more dollars or so involved in that bond issue, and a lot of it was not going for storage. Most of the money in this bond issue will go to storage. It's not perfect. I mean, if any of us in this room wanted to negotiate a better agreement, I'm sure we would have had one, but unfortunately, you got other people that have different ideas about what's important for the state of California, so you just do the best you can. And I think the governor, in this instance, did a pretty good job of bringing the groups together, both Republicans and Democrats, and coming up with a solution that most everyone supported. And nowadays, that's a surprise in itself. I'm also working with Senator Feinstein right now. This is something that, if we're going to get it done, we got to get it done in the next 2 weeks, is to come up with a interim solution on how we manage the Bay Delta. We're operating under this biological opinion on the Delta smelt, which is unrealistic. We let loose probably well over 1 million acre-feet of water, which absolutely should have been pumped into the system, and for no good reason, because some people at the Department of Interior are interpreting this biological opinion, in my opinion, wrong. And so we need to go back to the 2005 biological opinion and operate this thing more realistically. And Senator Feinstein's come a long way on this, beyond her comfort zone, I would say. And I'm hopeful that we can come to some resolution. Not, like, again, It's not perfect, but it's incremental improvement. Until we get storage, it's difficult to take on these environmental groups, especially in the north, and especially if we don't get the support from the state legislature or the governor in some of these instances. But this has to be done. We let 1 million acre-feet of water go through underneath the Golden Gate Bridge and didn't save one fish. Not one fish. That's criminal. And if we had that 1 million acre-feet right now, that would have relieved a lot of suffering in the Central Valley. We have close to 1 million acres of land fallow right now in the Central Valley. So you can imagine what that means to the farmers up there. I talked to one farmer. He got a little emotional in my office. He had planted a lot of almond trees, and it's not cheap to plant almond trees. You got to put the drip irrigation system in and do all that. So you go to your local bank, borrow the money, and usually it's about a 40 to 50% loan on that for farming. And now, right now, they can't show any water supply. So the banks have to, under the new bank regs, you have to show your capital value every year. So you got to come in and get your appraisal and show the bank how much your land's worth. Well, how much is your land worth if you don't have any water, if you're in farming? So all of a sudden, these guys are faced in a situation where their property is being reappraised, and the banks, even if you're current on that loan, are required to do a reassessment on your loan. Reassessment means when the banker calls you up and says, we're reassessing your loan, that means you're screwed. I want to translate this, because usually it means, come on in and bring your checkbook. We're gonna renegotiate this loan. And so, the farmers are saying, well, we don't have any money to do that with. So it's not funny when it comes to what's happening to these farmers. WRDA, some things we did get done. We were able to pass a WRDA bill, and in that process, I worked with Senator Feinstein. We put a WIFIA. If you know what a WIFIA is, it's similar to TIFIA. TIFIA, we've been able to use our gymnastics to help fund freeway developments and so forth in the state of California and elsewhere by being able to borrow money with the U.S. Borrowing capabilities, which is almost zero right now. So it has helped move that along. We wanted to do the same thing with WIFIA because we have a lot of projects that have an environmental requirement in order to move these things along, especially buying open space and so forth to develop water resources and the rest. So that gives water agencies such as yours and others more flexibility to develop and to get money to build these projects. And with that, I think I can go on, but I'd rather just open up Q&A. As was mentioned, I serve on Defense Appropriations, and I'm a senior member of that, and I also serve on I used to head up the intelligence community, but as far as funding them, I still serve as a liaison with the intelligence community. We fund the entire Department of Defense and all the intelligence agencies that we have, which is a number of them. And since the world is kind of slipping into the abyss, if anybody wants to talk about any of that, I'll talk about that too. So with that, I'll just open it up for questions. Yes, sir.
And you were talking about the expansion of increasing capacity in Shasta and San Luis Reservoir. Mm-hmm. These are part of the federal Central Valley project.
Right.
And do you envision at any time that the federal government would be a financial participant in the expansion of these along with the state water project?
We should be. As you know, we have a Bay Delta agreement, which I wrote years ago, which the federal government participates in. We appropriate money every year, including this year. Most of it goes into environmental remediation. We need to have that money now go into storage. We put a lot of money into doing the studies to develop those resources, including Shasta and San Luis Reservoir and sites and the rest. So at some point, the federal government needs to participate in development of those sources. Yeah.
Do you think that is possible that some large sums might come from the feds to build along with the state money?
It's possible, absolutely. We need to do major infrastructure, not just water development in the country, and we're going to have to find the resources to do that. So we put that off. I'll give the good Brown. Somebody said, well, Pat Brown spent a lot of money on developing infrastructure in the state of California. If you look at, we haven't done a lot of that since. We haven't really improved it, and the population in California has grown a little bit. We're about 37 million people in the state of California. So you can conserve a lot, that helps, but you can't conserve everything. We got to do desalinization. This new project down in San Diego is providing water for 300,000 people. We need to build about another 10 of those along the coast here in California. And we need to build all the reservoirs, and we need to build transmission facilities to get the water down here. It's easier said than done. Yes, sir.
John Collins, Fountain Valley City Council. I agree with the promotional materials that I read that you just said about the bond. I absolutely agree that that's a good thing to do. Obviously, you'd be an idiot if you didn't. But the fact of the matter is, bonds, I've talked to so many people over the years that don't understand that a bond is actually borrowing money and it has to be repaid. Is there a clear identification where the money will come from to repay that bond?
Well, it's a general obligation bond, so it has to be paid first out of the so we're borrowing the money. But we have borrowed money in the past for some crazy things, and so the taxpayers aren't jumping over their. They said, well, look what you did on the train. You said you're going to do this and do that, and then you diverted the money, and you misread the proposition, and they're right. So we have to convince them that this is different. This bond was, we narrowed it down to what we absolutely need. And we have to convince folks that this is absolutely necessary. And I suspect as this summer goes on, I don't think we're going to get a lot of rain between now and November. That might be helpful. But there is a lot of mistrust with the voters right now.
Again, the bond is a good thing, and there is mistrust and whatever, but I do believe it's a good thing. But is there any financial analysis that shows where that money, as a general obligation?
Yeah, you can get that from the state. I'm sure right here you can get it from this water agency. I'm sure they can get that.
Comes out of the state general fund.
Right, but the state general fund's going to have to go up, obviously, to pay that and the other bonds which are not paid.
Yeah, there's a number of bond debt here in the state of California.
Yeah, I know.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Calvert, Sean Duane, President of the Board of Directors of the Orange County Water District. Again, thank you for coming today. Regarding ocean desalination, do you think that there is any opportunity for an agency like ours to share a cost-sharing agreement for the development of our local proposed project in Huntington Beach?
I think it's worth exploring. I think we have used reclamation in the past on some projects where federal dollars are available to help leverage, encourage these types of projects to be built. So we need to look into that. It's absolutely necessary. Now that there's new technologies to desalinate water, this new graphic technology is supposed to bring down the cost of desalinization by half. Lockheed Martin, by accident, like all great inventions are always by accident, came upon this, or coming up with some filters to filter rocket fuel, and then found out that they have this nanotechnology that can actually be changed the size of the screen, or the nano screen, to filter out various impurities. And it doesn't clog up because it just, the salt or the impurities just sheen off. And so the cost of maintenance and the cost of energy, I understand, is half. That's huge in this business. So you have a significant facility here, so that once that technology is on board, that's going to have tremendous effect on desalinization from seawater. Yes, sir.
Can you give us an update on the Bravo Dam situation?
Prado Dam is well under construction, and we've had our fits and starts, but we see the light at the end of the tunnel. The last part of that project, Reach 9A and B, which is the Santa Ana River improvements below the dam, are pretty much completed. The brine line has been relocated, as you know, that comes into the plant here. It was underneath the Santa Ana River, so that was we could only release 5,000 CFS in a storm. That's done now, so we can release up to 25,000 CFS. It's a significant improvement. The last part of the dam is some additional levees and to raise the spillway. That's about a $60–70 million. We hope to have that appropriated here in the next couple of years and finish. Will be complete. The dam will be absolutely complete. About $2 billion project would cost in total, but it'll give this area especially that experienced that 1939 storm. I don't think probably too many people around here remembers that, but it put Fountain Valley underwater. So that's the reason Prado Dam is there. So I think we'll have it complete here in the next few years. Yes, sir.
We had a gent here recently who talked about the EPA's participation in water, and it had some ominous overtones to it. And I wondered, is there any way that at the federal level they can keep these folks under control? I mean, it would appear that
Well,
they're not even working.
well, we control their budget, and on the House side, we've adjusted them a little bit. The problem is in the Senate, where there's a different mindset over there. So I don't want to get political here, but because I know this is a bipartisan group, but if there are certain changes in the Senate coming in a couple of months, maybe we'll have a different type of negotiation. But right now, it's difficult. Right, for instance, on this Bay Delta agreement, the stakeholders have been working on this stuff for years, between the state, the federal government, all the agencies, and then EPA throws all of a sudden they keep saying, oh yeah, keep working, keep negotiating. Then they come in here just a couple of weeks ago and said, well, no, you can't take water out of the delta. That will increase salinity, increase impurities in the bay. You can't do that. Hell, we've been talking about it for the last 20 years. Now you come out and say that. So
My
you're right.
science is better than your science.
Yeah, well, it's not even science, it's politics. And so there's folks that just don't want to see water taken from one spot to another, and that's really the reality of it. Yes, sir.
It's obvious that storage is a big deal for drought survival.
Right.
And there's $2.7 billion in the bond issue for that. But the zinger is the first bullet. It says no funding for projects unless it provides measurable improvement for the Delta ecosystem. We play hell demonstrating measurable improvements for the Delta, say for Diamond Valley. How would you do that? It seems like this could be used by all the people that are really against any storage. They can use this to just block almost everything.
Well, like I said earlier, if I was to write this bond, or if you were to write this bond, we would have done it differently. But in California, faced with the realities we have to deal with the cards we're dealt. So, yeah, there's some problems. I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's a hell of a lot better than what we had before. And so we ought to just take it and make sure that we are able to develop that storage, because it's absolutely necessary. Yes, sir.
In terms of California's water problems being both a state and a federal issue, where does the federal government, both the administration and the congressional people, stand on supporting California?
Well, there is some folks in Washington may have some animosity about California, but you can't ignore us. We're a big part of the economy. We're no longer the 5th largest economy in the world. I think we're the 8th largest economy in the world. Kind of slipped over the last few years. But we're a hell of an anchor. So if things don't improve in our state, it drags down the rest of the country. So, and we are the most populous state in the union. We have a number of members of Congress that have some influence. And so I believe that at the end of the day, we should get back resources that we pay into the federal government in the form of taxes every year to develop infrastructure that's important to the residents of the state of California, just as we develop infrastructure, say, in Louisiana or other states which have had considerable federal investment over a number of years. And by the way, when I mentioned Louisiana, it's, you know, what happened there at Katrina was a horrific thing, and we had to put significant infrastructure improvements there, but it would be even more catastrophic in California if we had an earthquake, say, in the Bay Delta area with the mediocre infrastructure we have presently. The cost of that to the state of California and to the lives and property would be enormous. So these projects have to be built and not ignored. And we studied them to death. I mean, we passed the study that we need to start building them. Yes, sir.
Ken, I think we're all very appreciative of the program that led to the Calvert efforts earlier on. And I think we've learned that Coachella Valley isn't an infinite resource of deep aquifers like we may have thought in the mid-90s. But I'm wondering what the position of the federal government would be if things got worse. I mean, significantly worse in California. If it doesn't rain this winter, and we're complaining about some almond growers now, if we go another 6 or 8 months or maybe a year without rain, what will the federal government, it would make Southern California, it would put it on the level of the Katrina, the Sandy, the floods in the Mississippi. We don't have floods, but this is just as serious as a flood. So I'd like to know how that legislation, how does it get before the president? How do we take the actions that we might need?
Well, yeah, hypothetically, if we go another year or two without water, it'd obviously be a catastrophe in the Central Valley. And certainly it'll start really hitting people. I mean, let's face it, we haven't really felt the pain like you can feel it yet, especially here in the South, because we have done a lot of work here to store water, reclaim water, recycle, and the rest. But if this drought continues and we continue to deplete the reservoirs that we have, then tough decisions are going to have to be made. So that's why we need to get ahead of this and start building. But even if we passed this bond in November and we do what we need to do in Washington, D.C., if we don't get any rain in the next couple of years, there's going to have to be some tough decisions. And I've been talking about Imperial County, and you know, I was involved, as you remember, in the negotiation on that Colorado River settlement. That wasn't a fun day, I'll tell you. But yeah, but it you know, we had to get it done, and those water transfer agreements are important. So those types of things probably be brought to the table. The folks who own those water rights can probably get pretty wealthy, because we start water. I think Imperial Irrigation District is doing pretty well right now. I know that they're not totally happy, but how much an acre foot are they selling that water to San Diego right now? $300 an acre foot, and they're selling, I think, up to 200,000 acre feet right now. And then with what we did with All American Canal and water conservation, really their number of acres that are in production hasn't changed. Pretty much the same. So it can work for farmers and urban users if we can work together to transfer that water. But those are tough things to do.
Lake Mead continues to
Right.
decrease, and the forecast is showing that by June of next year, it may hit the point where the generators, the dam, will not have any water, and hydroelectric power will stop. What will the federal government, or is the federal government able to do to conserve, to keep it from happening in June of next year?
if that happens, you know, they're re-drilling at Lake Mead right now to deliver water into Nevada because the water levels are going below the pipe levels to go into Clark County. And it's a significant problem. As you know, we have 60 million acre-feet of storage on the Colorado River system. The storage is not the problem in the Colorado River system. The problem is we don't have any snow. We don't have any rain. We don't have any water. So, you know, I know people ask me, well, what are you going to do if this happens or if that happens? I have no idea. We're on new territory. You know, you're asking, we have contingency plans? Well, it's like the president said the other day. I guess we're working on a strategy. You know, if there's not any rain, we got a problem. You can't manufacture rain, so we'll be out there doing a war dance. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much for being here this morning. And we're all obviously interested in the water issues, and you've been very involved in that. You're involved in a lot of issues in Washington. And, you know, we asked you to go up and make a lot of hard choices about what we're going to spend our resources on. So in that vein, and since you're here, do we see a path out of the war? Do you see us seeing a path out of the war?
Well, that's a good question. You know, nobody wants to go to war. I've been to a number of funerals of young men that have died in the service of their country, and it's the worst thing that I do. Talking to his parents, and it's a horrible thing. But we have adversaries in the world that don't like us, don't want to kill us, and it's the responsibility of United States Armed Forces to defend this country and to hopefully keep that problem away from the shores of the United States. I think it was a mistake to leave Iraq without a status of force agreement. Malaki was too close to his own clan, so to speak, to the Shiites and not to the Sunnis. So we needed to have a moderating force there, which would have been garrisoned, but there, and be able to gather intelligence. Didn't happen. We should have gone into Syria sooner rather than later, before Assad was able to put up his forces and fend that off. And then we had the beginnings of what was ISIL, then ISIS, and now the Islamic State, which now we don't have really in Iraq or Syria. We call it Syrak. Syrak is huge. It's a huge area, and they want to put a caliphate together that goes from Istanbul to Vienna. And people call them JV terrorists, some people said. They're not JV terrorists. I think people realize that now. They're massacring thousands of people. Christians, Jews, minorities, Sunnis, because Shia, because they're Sunni. Unfortunately, many of these people have U.S. passports, British passports, and can move. And so we don't take it lightly. We've been on the phone the last few days, and we can't take this lightly. We get hit again. This economy, as fragile as it is, will suffer mightily. And not only, that's not just the economy, just what's going on in the world. So, yeah, I don't like war. Hell, America doesn't like this stuff. But there's a reason we're there. People, in about another week or so, will have the anniversary of 9/11 once again. And if anyone thinks it'll never happen again, I got to tell you that that's not the case. I was just in Pakistan a couple of months ago, and they have well over 60 nuclear weapons. And to say that the Pakistani government is a stable and robust democracy would be a big lie. It's a real weird place. And there's a lot of people who'd like to get a hold of those nuclear weapons. And that's what really keeps a lot of folks awake at night. And if anybody says it can't happen, That's not the case. It's one of the reasons we have to keep a residual force in Afghanistan also, primarily to keep an eye on the Pakistanis. That's been a problem area from the time of Christ, and will continue to be a problem area. So I wish there was an easy answer to this, but there isn't. Yes, sir.
Following on that same thing, Congressman, the sequestration the last time, I guess the trade-off was virtually cut the budget of the military. Is there anything being done to try to stem that tide of reducing our forces at the worst time that I can see in the history of the Union?
Yeah. We have, as you are aware, we're cutting back the United States Army to the smallest level it's been in some time. Marine Corps. We have now the smallest number of ships in the United States Navy since the Spanish-American War. Something like that. I don't know, it's a ridiculous number. I have somebody say. Now the ships we have are very capable ships. I give them that. But we're down to 200 and I think if we don't start counting tugboats and service ships and oilers, we're down to about 270 warships. And so if you can see the drop in numbers from the height of, say, we're getting close to 500 ships about 20-some years ago, down to 270 ships now. And even though with the capability of these ships, you still need presence. I was over in Singapore and over in Manila. The Philippines are asking us to come back into Subic Bay. And the Japanese are all of a sudden having second thoughts about us moving out of Okinawa. All of a sudden they discovered a country called China and South China Sea, and they're poking around down there and taking up territory and telling ships that they can't use old-time maritime lanes and so forth, or airspace. Come on. Well, so the Japanese now are going to dump the old MacArthur budget restrictions that they had in their Constitution, which they need to do, to increase their military spending significantly, to expand their so-called defensive force. Other allies such as Australia and others are going to do the same. So with the United States, we have a responsibility in the Pacific. A so-called shift to the Pacific is important, so we have to make sure we have the equipment and the manpower to do that. And Europe, as we found out, is not a safe zone anymore, is it? Putin is continuing to move on Ukraine. Looks like he's going to be successful. He's already got Crimea gobbled up. Next is probably the Balkans. And if anybody thinks that he's going to stop at the Ukraine, you don't understand Mr. Putin. He wants to rebuild the glory of the past Soviet Union. And once KGB, always KGB. I'm a real believer in that. Yes, ma'am.
Congressman, I want to bring you back to
Water.
California
Yeah.
and water. Senator Feinstein and Congressman Valadeo were working on a proposal
Right.
for the San Joaquin.
Right.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
Where is that now, and is there any hope of getting any action before?
What I was mentioning, we're very close to something, and I'm hoping we can come to an agreement. We have to do it in the next 2 weeks, or we'll have to do it in the lame duck session, but I'm hoping we can keep the pressure on to do it in the next 2 weeks. And that would give us some relief on pumping. That's basically it.
Frederick Callahan from Caltech, JPL. We're in the business of the satellites that monitor.
Yeah, I heard you guys. Yeah.
Probably part of my funding source.
Right.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Back on the whole business of the smelt and the salmon, are we going to waste a comparable amount of money, water this year? Under the
Well, we're already wasting it right now. I mean, there's water going out from some of these reservoirs. It's pretty hard to explain.
That's right.
And it's going on right now.
That's my point.
Yeah, it's going on right now.
Is that a responsible position? I mean,
No, they shouldn't be doing it. They should be holding back those water releases. Yeah, but they are doing it. They're saying that this Department of Interior, Secretary of Interior, and folks at Interior believe that they have a responsibility under the Endangered Species Act to release water to protect not just the smelt, but the salmon in that area. So they're releasing water. And like I said, well over 1 million acre-feet of water that probably has not saved a fish. One has been released.
The reports were that 49% last year.
Yeah. That's about right, about half.
Question, that would be make a political question, but what's the probability of a change in leadership in the Senate?
According to people who do that for a living, Cook and others, it's about 60-40. But in my business, 2 months is an eternity. So Republicans can screw it up, trust me. Yes. Yes.
Thank you, Congressman
Sure.
Calvert, for being here. I represent a division where the 5 agencies that I serve are 100% dependent on potable water that's imported. I'm very, very interested in the Doheny desalination facility that's been through the 3 stages of study. What would you recommend as the most effective federal partnership with those providers of that potential facility and working together for funding for the future?
Well, reclamation should be involved in that, and obviously, because desalinization, I don't know why is as controversial as it is. I do know why. And you can develop these projects all the way to the point where you're going to take out permits to build it, and then all of a sudden, hair on fire, somebody comes in, oh my God, if you got water, that means there's going to be more people. So that's growth inducement. So then you get all these groups file lawsuits and so forth against it. So some of these federal agencies bought into that stuff. So that's your biggest obstacle, biggest challenge. But you got to keep pushing it, and we'll try to do what we can on the federal level to fund a small part of that to get leverage to develop these projects. But that's an important one, and I've been involved in that a little bit. There's some money going into that. One last question. Way in the back. Yes, sir.
Congressman, thanks for coming out this morning. You're familiar with our groundwater replenishment system here in Orange County, where we're reusing the treated wastewater, reinjecting into the groundwater. We have a second phase that will be shortly coming online, and that will allow us to recapture about 130 million gallons a day will be reclaimed back into the groundwater. Even with that, there are still, on a typical day, 70 million gallons going out the ocean outfall, which is really a waste of the resource. And I serve on the Orange County Sanitation District Board, and we're really focused on how can we put to productive use those final 70 million gallons that go out that are lost to the ocean, that were wasted, really. We applied for a federal grant to start a conceptual study. We were not successful. I just mentioned this. I want to put it on your radar screen because I know we'll be reapproaching a number of threads, because in my mind it should be one of the top priorities for Orange County water resource development, those 70 million gallons that are currently lost.
Okay, I'll keep an eye on it. Okay, well, again, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. Have a great day.
Well, what a great honor and privilege we've had today to hear somebody, a senior member of the United States Congress, seated elected member. We just cannot thank you enough for coming down. And if there's anything that any of us can do for you, please feel free to call on us. Please feel free to call on me personally, Mr. Calvert. It's a pleasure to know you, and I'm glad to call you a friend. Thank you so much. So now, in reverse order, we shall take the remainder of the agenda. At this point in the meeting, we will ask for introductions, announcements and introductions. Is there anybody in the audience who has something important to announce or would like to make an introduction? Yeah. Oh, yes, sir. Mr. Swan is reminding me that we have not yet said the Pledge of Allegiance. So I will say it's a great day in America, and I will ask Mr. Swan to please lead us in the pledge.
Please join with me in pledging allegiance to our flags. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mr. Swan, thank you. Announcements and introductions. Is there anybody new in the room who would like to introduce themselves? Yes, sir.
Bob Kylie, President of Brooklyn Water District. I'd like to introduce our new general manager, Mark.
Let's give a big round of applause to Ms. Anybody else who'd like to introduce themselves? Anybody else who'd like to introduce their friends? Any announcements? Any important announcements out there? Okay, thanks very much. First up, we have Linda Ackerman. Is Linda Ackerman somebody to do? She's at a meeting. Mr. Barbary, would you like to give the Met report? Mr. Barbary will give the Met report.
Good morning. I'm not Linda Ackerman, just in case. The way the pecking order works, Larry Dick is out of town, and Linda is out of town, so you got me. So till we get our fourth director, then I can miss these, and then that new director can fill in. Up at Metropolitan last month, we've got plenty of water. Finances are solid. Finances are secure. The big issue last month was we voted to freeze our AV value for the coming year, which is what we did last year as well. That is frozen as a way of providing funds on property taxes, no increases, to help pay Bay Delta expenses. And our big challenge at Met is to get the finances in shape because we will be rolling on the expenses and the costs associated with the Bay Delta fix onto the water rate. By law, we have the ability to increase property tax rates to pay for state water project costs. That would never pass the board. This district would never support that. And I don't think LA would ever support it, and I don't think San Diego would ever support that. So it will go on the water rates, which is the appropriate thing. So this year we're cleaning up the finances, getting rid of as many of the swaps as we can. So we will be in a good financial footing for that. Other than that, water-wise, we continue to be privileged to have significant amounts of storage. Mr. Keitlinger and I were in Sacramento a few weeks ago last week for some meetings, and it's amazing how many people in Northern California are saying, you know, we really should be building storage in Northern California. It really seems to make sense. So Metropolitan really is blazing the way on that. So that's the Met report. And
thank you, Brett. Next, Mr. Swan with a report about the Association of California Water Agencies. Mr. Swan.
Thank you, Sean. As most of you know, there are really four or five principal parts of WACO. You know, we look after state, federal legislation, so we monitor that, work with the legislators, help develop policies that are used in the legislature. We intercede as an amicus in various lawsuits, to help the member agencies. We run interference and help organize, scientific studies of regulatory, affairs where government comes in, wants to regulate things like arsenic or Chrome 6, and we put together working groups, participate in working groups, and we also provide benefits. So about 2 years ago, we started working on the principles that we thought were saleable in the legislature on the water bond. So we came up with a framework about a year ago on that and have worked diligently, and that has paid off handsomely in the water bond that we now have. We were recommending a water bond,
somewhere close to $7.5 billion, and that's exactly what happened. The composition of the water bond is a little bit different, but the Aqua staff were over into the halls of the legislature and working very tightly with it in order to get this bond back on the ballot and scaled down, and most importantly, in order to get the governor to agree to support it. And when you get your legislative package, you'll see the governor is writing or has written one of the arguments that, if it goes through judicial review, will be on the ballot arguments on the bond. In a similar fashion, about a year ago, we put together a working group, mostly from the Central Valleys, and charged them with coming up with groundwater policy. A very contentious issue in the Central Valley, not at all down here as much, because we've been doing most of the things that this bond was asking the people in the Central Valley to do. We've been doing those things for decades down here. So, I'm proud to say that as a result of the work of a lot of people in this room, the Aqua staff, many other people, both of these measures, one made it onto the ballot for the bond, and the other one has been, on the governor's desk to be signed. And I don't know if he signed that yet, but it's been sent to. There's 3 bills. There's 3 bills. They broke it into 3 different parts, in order to make it easier to get through the legislature. The other thing we have is that in October 26th and 27th, the Region 8, 9, and 10 conference will be held in San Diego. You should be getting a flyer, and if you haven't already got an email blast on that, and it's, hey, what are things that we can do to cope with this dry period that we're going through? We'll also get a rah-rah pump up, thing from Tim Quinn, on the bonds. This is really important. It's not, the bond is the biggest sum of money that's been allocated basically to the water industry since the Burns-Porter Act. I mean, it's probably more than the Burns-Porter Act, but not adjusted for inflation. So there's been $20 billion of bonds passed prior to this, of which a very small portion, maybe 4 or 5 billion of that, has been actually spent by the water industry itself. The rest of it were parks and other things, conservation easements. So this is a wonderful opportunity. The only thing I would leave you is, I believe that with the governor supporting this, we will pass this bond. The polling data shows that his active support is worth about 13 percentage points in an election. Like Congressman Calvert said, that's 2 months away. Lots of things change in that. You've got bullet trains and other things, but if we get this passed, I just hope that we responsibly, spend that money and put it, into things that, make our grandchildren as proud of, the work the water industry did, as people have become with Governor Brown the first, and the things that he did with the money that he was given. Thank you very much.
Today we have something new on the agenda, and that is a federal legislative report. Eric Saperstein, representing ENS Resources, one of the lobbyists that works for the Orange County Water District. Mr. Saperstein has done an admirable job of helping us bring your tax dollars back home to fund projects like the world-famous groundwater replenishment system. Today, Mr. Saperstein will give us an overview of what bills are pending before the Congress and how we might go about working with them to bring more of those tax dollars home. Mr. Saperstein.
Well, thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me here. Before I go into my update, I just like to say something. Listening to Chairman Calvert and his presentation, you hear a lot about dysfunctionality of Washington, and I think he made reference to that at several points. But I think what's important is to recognize that Mr. Calvert sort of symbolizes what we need more of in Washington. He's the type of person who has institutional memory of the issues, number one. And number two, he listens and then talks the issues out. He's always available. So from a sort of big picture perspective, it's wonderful to have somebody like that in Washington, and it gives me hope that the dysfunctionality that we read about in the papers, that we experience so often, is not necessarily the end result. There are members like Mr. Calvert, and I think in the years ahead you're going to see more out of Washington dealing with the big issues and bringing back to the local level the authorities and the state level the authority to take action. And I think the drought bill, as he made reference to, is one of those areas where you're going to see compromise made and allow projects to go forward. Okay. With that, at the risk of repeating some of what Mr. Calvert said, let me sort of shift the direction to two issues. What's going to happen after the drought bill is compromised out in Congress and you look beyond the drought bill? Because the drought bill right now has one word attached to it: emergency. This is a short-term response to deal with the issues that are going to be, I think, long-term. And before Congress recessed for the August break, legislation was introduced by Senator Feinstein and Senator Boxer in the House, or in the Senate, excuse me, and in the House, Representative Grace Napolitano from the Los Angeles Basin, to address the long-term issues. Now, this legislation, S-2771, H.R. 5363, is not going to go anywhere this year. That's a given. But what I would like to leave with you is the thought that this legislation, which is one of many bills floating around dealing with drought, resiliency issues, climate change, is a marker, if you will, for the next Congress. Because if we are in a historic drought pattern that appears to be the case, and the fact that this drought doesn't stop at the California borders, but it goes throughout the Southwest and even into the Southeast of this country, Congress is going to have to do something. And that something still remains to be seen. But if you look at these bills that were introduced from a California perspective, it's good news. Number one, it creates a reinvigorated commitment to the federal government's role to help local communities build projects. There's a new grants program in this bill to build water recycling and desalination projects. There is a new program of assistance to support local communities to provide incentives for the acquisition of water conservation technologies, be they irrigation or just homeowner plumbing fixtures. There is additional authorizations to create, Mr. Calvert referenced the WIFIA program, TIFIA program. There's another effort underway to create a WIFIA-like program for water supply specifically. So these are markers for the next Congress. Like I said, it's not going to happen now, but we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars being put on the table to be talked about to authorize for future funding needs. And make no mistake, even though we're in budget problems, you know, as this drought inflicts more and more pain and suffering on the economy, Congress will have to act. I mean, I think they're going to have to find ways to promote it. And I think the message I want to leave with you is that the ways that they will proceed will probably be innovative. You'll see more efforts at public-private partnerships to bring private capital to the table to build projects. Not privatization per se, but partnerships. You'll see more efforts at low-interest loans and subsidies out of the Treasury as opposed to direct grants. And then for hardship circumstances, you'll see direct grants. I think that's sort of the future of what we're looking at in the debate. And then going to sort of where are we looking for the next year or so on appropriations, I want to go back to Mr. Calvert. He noted that the House Committee on Appropriations reduced EPA's budget significantly in areas where they felt that it needed to be reduced. But what he didn't say, or I didn't hear, is that he also made a commitment to preserve the federal government's role in supporting local communities on water infrastructure. There is funding to continue the state revolving loan fund program for water and wastewater needs. That's a great thing. They are not walking away from the core commitments that have to be there to help local communities comply with federal mandates. And the second thing they did was to tell EPA, if you're going to put this WIFIA program into effect in the next year's time, you need to come back to us before we give you money, telling us how you're going to run this program so that the monies that are made available to local communities are provided swiftly and meaningfully to good water projects. That's great, because what that signals is a commitment to this new way of doing business and letting EPA know that they've got to come up with a program that makes sense and isn't encumbered by red tape. So that's sort of where we are on sort of the big picture of water. I think in the final analysis, on the lower level of what happens, you heard Mr. Calvert say we're going to have a continuing resolution at least through December. If the Senate goes Republican, which most of the prognosticators give about a 55 to 60% chance, then I think we have a continuing resolution until March, and then the new leadership will take over and they'll figure out what the budget should be for the rest of fiscal year 15. If the Democrats hold on to the Senate, then I think we'll figure out a way to finalize spending bills between, say, after the election, mid-November till January 1, and that will be the lame duck session. And then whether they come to agreement on a drought bill, I'm optimistic after hearing Mr. Calvert's comments. I think the key here is because of budget issues, we're not going to see money. I think what we're going to see is a directive to the federal agencies to streamline their environmental permitting processes to allow projects to go forward. So that's where we are there. And then on a separate issue, and I apologize, I see some faces that may have seen me speak recently on this issue on the Waters United States, so you have to bear with me. But somebody asked about the Waters United States rulemaking effort. This is a huge effort that EPA has undertaken over the last couple of years as a result of a Supreme Court decision. Does everybody know what I'm talking about when I say Waters United States? Okay, I'm going to dispense with that then as far as further details, except to say this rulemaking is important not because it's going to have EPA in every sort of nook and cranny of water issues when it comes to permitting. It's more important because I think it's emblematic of the way policy is being written in Washington. And there's a new way of doing business. As much as our kids are communicating by text messages, policymaking has become a campaign in many ways. And so I have a little video, a small video, that for those of you who have seen Frozen, I swore off animated movies after my youngest kid got to be about 16. But for those of you who have seen the movie Frozen, you may recognize this. And Crystal, have you got it going?
Did you see this? The EPA wants to regulate water in our ditches now. Our ditches are dry most of the time. There's hardly ever any water in them. That's enough.
Is dry on my farm today, not a puddle anywhere. There's no water flowing, but the government doesn't care. Once more the EPA is knocking at our door with a brand new rule. They want to regulate us more. They've tried before and we said no. Why should they control what doesn't know? Agriculture's safe, that's what they say. It's what they always say. That's enough, that's enough. Can't take away anymore. That's enough, that's enough. The EPA and the Corps, they will try to justify, but we won't back down. Don't need more government anyway. That's enough, that's enough. No more Calvert place. That's enough, that's enough. We won't back away. What can we do to ditch the rule? Tell the EPA. Don't need more government anyway.
So that, I wish I could take credit for it. That was the Missouri Farm Bureau with the help of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce that put that out. The message I want to leave with you is this rule, I think, is going to go down as one of the greatest missteps of federal regulation initiatives, because what it has done developed a sort of a critical mass and a new way of doing business in Washington, of explaining the issues. And so ultimately, this rule that has raised so many concerns on so many levels is going to end up probably in the courts. It's going to be litigated till the cows come home. From your perspective on the waterfront, the big issue is whether or not the rule captures water recycling facilities, for example. My guess is after the comment period closes on October 20th of this year, EPA will spend their time looking at it, and surprise, surprise, by around November 4th after the elections, they'll probably come out with some kind of statement on when they're going to issue the rule. They'll pull back. They have to pull back. Some of the stuff in there is unsustainable. But in the final analysis, it will be litigated. I don't see this rule ultimately impacting public agencies or water in general the way it's written right now. And the fact that Chairman Calvert and his colleagues in both the House and the Senate have language that they would like to put in the appropriations bill, as he mentioned, to stop the agency from using budget resources to move forward on this bill, sort of signals where we're headed. But the key, as I said at the beginning, is this is the new way of communicating. This is how issues are being discussed. In many ways, this is why things are so public now, that the debates are more public. It's not transparency, it's more a fact that everybody can communicate so quickly. So as you think about responding to federal issues that of special concern to your communities, think about the value of not only entertaining on the issue, but communicating it using today's technologies, because that's where it's headed. And I think at that point, in the interest of time, I'll stop right here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric. Next up, we have Heather Baez from MODOC going to speak to us regarding the Water Quality Supply and Infrastructure Act of 2014, otherwise known as the California Water Bond. Heather.
Hey, good morning. In the interest of time, I have a very short water bond presentation. Our speaker next month is going to go into it a little bit more in depth, and with that and the groundwater bills. But if you bear with me, and we'll get it going. So the copies that I made did not show this slide very well, so here it is on the big screen. This is the breakdown of the funds, $2.7 billion to surface and groundwater storage, watershed protection, water recycling, safe drinking water, regional water reliability, and statewide flood management. So, as we heard, there's $2.7 billion going to surface and groundwater storage. It is continuous appropriations for above and below ground storage projects. 2 reservoirs are being tapped for these funds. There's one north of Sacramento in Colusa County, and the other is in the Sierra northeast of Fresno. Those are expected to win the funding based on the criteria. As somebody noted, no funding for projects from this chapter unless it provides measurable improvements in the Delta ecosystem. These 2 will meet that criteria. Only projects identified in the 2001 CalFed Record of Decision are eligible for surface storage funding under this. And then it requires a 50% match of funds. Under watershed protection, ecosystem restoration, and state settlements, we're looking at almost $1.5 billion. $327 million of that goes to conservancies, $200 million to Wildlife Conservation Board, $285 million to the Department of Fish and Wildlife outside the Delta, and then $87.5 million to the Department of Fish and Wildlife for Delta funding, $475 million to the state settlement obligations, including CBPIA, and $120 million to rivers and creeks. So the $87.5 million for Delta, that includes water quality, ecosystem restoration, and fish protection and facilities. They were very clear to make sure that that wasn't any funding for the tunnel project. Under groundwater sustainability, $800 million of that is to prevent and reduce contaminants, and then $100 million to provide sustainable groundwater management planning and implementation. Under regional water reliability, 810 million, 510 for integrated regional water management, 200 for stormwater capture, and 100 million for water conservation. Under that 200 million for stormwater capture, the San Juan Basin is an eligible project under that, and regional projects will be looked upon favorably. And I'm going to go, I do have a slide that kind of breaks down the IRWM fund, so we'll get to that in just a second. So for water recycling, 725 million. Water recycling projects include treatment, storage, conveyance, and distribution facilities for potable and non-potable recycling projects, contaminant and salt removal, including groundwater and desalination projects, pilot projects for new potable reuse and other salt contaminant removal technology, and then this one does require a 50% match as well. Safe drinking water, it's going to leverage some federal funds for safe drinking water and clean water programs for disadvantaged communities. 260 million for small community wastewater program, 260 million for drinking water, and there's 5 million per project limit under this particular one. And then the smallest piece of the pie is the statewide flood management. And that's primarily for the Delta Levy subvention programs, and then 100 million for statewide flood management projects. So this is the general provisions. So we have 7.1 billion of new debt, and then 425 million of unissued bonds that had already been previously approved by voters and unspent. Some of these are really old. I don't even remember Prop 44. That was a while ago. And then Prop 1E, the section of money in Prop 1E that's being appropriated, nobody applied for that. So we're asking the voters, hey, I know you already approved funding for these particular projects, but will you consider it for this one instead? So that's why those are being reappropriated. Eligible applicants will include public agencies, nonprofits, public utilities, and mutual water companies. And then the funding eligibility requires compliance with the 2009 Water Conservation Act. That was the package of 4 bills that were passed when the original $11 billion bond was passed in 2009. And then they were very clear, it's Bay Delta Conservation Plan neutral. So this is what we're looking at here in Orange County. There's 63 million that's going to the Santa Ana region, IRWMP, and then 52 million for San Diego, which also includes South Orange County. Desalination will be an eligible project under recycling. The Santa Ana watershed is eligible for funding, the San Juan Basin, and then there's an additional 100 million is available for water use efficiency outside the IRWM that can be utilized for conservation purposes. And there's our support and opposition right now. And there's a paper in the very back. You can write down your questions and bring them next month for the speaker that's going to go into a little bit more detail, or I'll do my best to answer anything that I can. I know I went through this quickly, but we're running out of time. So.
Somebody asked earlier about the liability of the bond and our state finances.
Right.
And I think there's it's available is the legislative analyst report on it, and you might want to recommend that to them.
Absolutely. That's exactly what I was thinking when I heard the question. The LAO, the Legislative Analyst's Office, has done a report on the bond. It's on the Secretary of State's website right now, along with the ballot arguments in support and opposition. They are up for review until I think September 12th, maybe. And so they can be changed, but they are there for your review right now. The way that the funding works is, all of our tax dollars get sent to Sacramento, and Prop 98 funding goes first. So this K through 12 education is paid first, then our debt, and then state salaries, and then everything else. So that's yes, that's how it works. So education funding first, then debt, and then state workers get paid. Any questions?
Yeah. I assume that the Prado Reservoir enlargement, the spillway, and the remaining work is also eligible under stormwater capture?
Yes.
Yeah. That has a big impact on Orange County.
Yes.
Thank you, Heather. I don't need to tell all of you that clean, affordable water is fundamental to our civil liberty and key to the economic development of our communities. And it's great to be with you this morning with Mr. Calvert and all these other respective professionals who are deliberating over these very important topics. And it's great to see this stuff getting off the ground. So thank you very much for coming today. Before we adjourn, I'll remind you that the Cal DSAL conference is coming up October 6th and 7th in Monterey. I hope to see you there. And now we will adjourn to our next regularly scheduled WACO meeting Friday, October 3rd at 7:30 a.m. Thanks for coming today.